Hello class 8. Today we will do the second part of the nervous system. Today we will deal only with spinal cord. Okay. So you can see the diagram on the screen. This is the structure of the spinal cord. It arises from the medulla of the brain and then extends all the way downwards as far as your vertebral column extends at the back. So the spinal cord is the continuation of the medulla oblongata of the brain. So lowest part of the brain in the head is the medulla oblongata. So from medulla oblongata, this small wire-like structure arises and goes right down through your back, and that is called a spinal cord. So it's the extension of the, we can say it is the extension of the medulla oblongata of the brain. It is like a cord coming out from a hole at the base of the skull, running through the full length of the vertebral column. So the delicate spinal cord runs through the back and it is protected by the vertebral column because it's very, very delicate. So the delicate spinal cord is protected by the vertebral column. And it has it is somewhat similar to the brain, not as you look at it, it's a long wire-like structure, but like the brain, the spinal cord is also protected by the meninges. So spinal cord is also protected by the meninges, and it has cerebrospinal fluid. Now, where is the cerebrospinal fluid? I will tell you now. Have a look on the screen. Now, this is the cross-section of the spinal cord. Okay. The cross-section of the spinal cord shows two similar halves. It will have two halves, the right and the left. The two similar halves are fused to form a small canal in the center called the central canal. So you can see the central canal here, the tiny one, hole over here, the central canal. And this central canal is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. So the central canal is surrounded by the H-shaped, you can have a look over here, the H-shaped brown structure called the gray matter. So the central canal is surrounded by the H-shaped area called the gray matter, which consists of cell bodies of the neurons. So it contains the gray matter, contains the cell body of the neuron. Please remember that. The outer portion has the white matter, is called the white matter, and it contains all the nerve fibers. Please remember that. It contains all the nerve fibers. So, once more I'll repeat it. The gray matter, the H-like structure in the cross-section of the spinal cord is the gray matter, and it will have cell bodies of the neuron. It will have what? It has the cell bodies of the neuron, whereas the outer portion is called the white matter, which contains the nerve fibers. It contains the nerve fibers. Is it okay? Now, it is opposite to the brain. The brain will have gray matter outside and white matter inside, whereas the spinal cord, the cross section of the spinal cord will have, or the spinal cord will have white matter outside and the gray matter inside. Now we come to the functions of the spinal cord. Number one, the spinal cord conducts the reflexes below the neck region. All the reflex action below the neck region will be controlled by the spinal cord. It also conducts the sensory impulse from the skin and the muscles to the brain, so that it will carry the messages. If you touch something and you have to feel it, and then the sensation of the touch will be taken by the spinal cord to the brain. So it conducts the sensory impulses from the muscles to the brain. It also conducts motor responses from the brain to the nucleus trunk and the leaves. So these are the functions of the spinal cord. Now, before we talk about the reflex action, the last portion of the chapter today, the reflex action, I just want to tell you what reflex action is and what is a response and what is a stimuli and so on. So we'll discuss about that. So any condition in an environment which causes a reaction of an organism is known as the stimulus. Okay. Now, the reaction of the organism to a stimulus is called a response. So the reaction to the external stimulus is called a response. Like for example, when a cold wind blows, in a winter season, when a cold, very chilly wind blows, what will you do? You will have the sensation of the coldness. That is the stimulus. And what will be the response? You will wear warm clothes or you keep yourself warm. So that is the good example of a response. So the stimuli can be either from other living things or due to non-living factors such as water, heat, change of temperature, dust, chemicals and so on in the environment. So these are called the external stimuli. So whatever stimuli occurs outside in the environment, that is the external stimuli, whereas some of the stimuli which arise within the organism's body are called the internal stimuli. Okay, so we have the external stimuli and the internal stimuli. Please remember that. Okay, so internal stimuli, the examples could be thirst, hunger, pain, and so many other things that happens inside our body. So now we come to the reflex action. We come to the reflex action. So what is a reflex action? The action that your body takes without the involvement of your brain. So it happens instantly. And this kind of response is known as the reflex action. So the spinal cord controls some actions that do not involve the brain. This reaction is automatic and does not involve thinking. You do not have to for the reflex action to occur, you don't have to think. It happens all of a sudden without thinking. Like somebody maybe puts a finger in front of your eyes. What do? You automatically move your head and blink your eyes. So that is a response, and that is in which the brain doesn't control. So this kind of reflex, this kind of action is called the automatic action without the involvement of the brain, is called the reflex action. So the nerve pathway of the reflex action is called the reflex arc. As you can see, the diagrammatic representation of the reflex arc on the screen now. You can have a look. So the nerve pathway of the reflex action is called the reflex arc. The reflex arc involves three neurons: the sensory neuron, the association neuron, and the motor neuron. As you can see in the diagram, this is the sensory neuron, this is the association neuron, and this is the motor neuron. These are the motor neurons. This is the sensory neuron. Over here we have the association neuron, and this is the motor neuron. So sensory neuron arises from the receptor. The sensory neuron arises from the receptor. So first, what happens is that how does the reflex arc work? So first, a stimulus triggers an impulse in a receptor, maybe your hand or your skin or whatever you smell or whatever you see, whatever you touch. So that is called the receptor. So the stimulus triggers an impulse in a receptor, which could be any sensory organ or the structure that receives the stimulus. So the structure that receives the stimulus is known as the organ which receives the stimulus is called the receptor. It could be any sense organ in your body. So the stimulus is triggers an impulse. You have an impulse, or it is an electrical message that goes to your spinal cord here. So the impulse then travels from the receptor through a sensory neuron to the spinal cord. So whatever the receptor receives the message, the impulse is taken by the sensory neuron to the association neuron, to the spinal cord. Now in the spinal cord, what happens is, it passes through the association neuron to the motor neuron and finally reaches the muscles of the effector organ through the motor neuron. So the sensation will be taken by the sensory neuron to the spinal cord, and it is continued to pass through the association neuron and then through the motor neuron. That impulse goes to the muscle. So the muscles of the effector organ contract, moving away from the stimulus. So this is how the reflex action works. Now, the last portion of the chapter we will do some common examples of reflex action. What are they? They are sneezing. So when an unwanted particle enters your nose, you start sneezing. That is a reflex action. Blinking of eyes. When a foreign particle enters your eyes, obviously you will blink your eyes, isn't it? So blinking of an eye is a reflex action. So if you touch a hot object, if you accidentally touch a hot object, what do you do? The reflex action would be, you will immediately withdraw your hand from that particular hot object. So it does not need thinking, it happens all of a sudden, isn't it? So that is a reflex action. Withdrawal of leg, if you suddenly step on the nail. So when you step on the nail, obviously you take your foot away from the nail, and that is also a reflex action. And the last example I would like to give you about the reflex action is the knee jerk reflex in response to tapping under the knee. So sometimes if you tap under the knee or just above the knee, the whole leg jerks, isn't it? So that is also a reflex action. So today we talked about the spinal cord, the cross section of the spinal cord, and about the reflex action and the reflex arc. So with this, we come to the end of the chapter. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you understood. Thank you so much.